But at Union Square Cafe, what I found was absolutely amazing, which was our entire kitchen staff, who we had said, you can go home right now, we're not opening the restaurant today, had said, no, we're staying here. And they had already decided, without asking me, without asking anybody, we're going to be closed for business, but we're going to be open to our community. And they were using the entire dining room to make sandwiches just to hand people.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story, a series where New Yorkers talk about their city and how September 11th changed that. I'm Will Thwaites, and I want to welcome all of you to the second season of Our City, Our Story. For those of you who listened to the first season, my voice is a new one for you. Again, I'm Will Thwaites, and I'll be co-hosting this season with the original host, Jenny Pachuki. Sometimes you'll hear Jenny's voice chime in with questions and insights. Other times, I'll be the one guiding you along the way. The second season, it has great conversations with fascinating New Yorkers. You'll hear them tell their personal September 11th stories and talk about how that day reshaped this city. So without further ado, let's start with restaurateur Danny Meyer, the man behind New York establishments like Union Square Cafe, Gramercy Tavern, and Shake Shack. He isn't from New York originally. He grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and he attributes his philosophy on hospitality, for which he's known, to his Midwestern upbringing. Here's my co-host, Jenny Pachuki, in the studio with Danny Meyer.
Can you tell me about some of your early experiences with food or restaurants that made you want to make a career of this?
Most of my early experiences with restaurants in St. Louis had a lot more to do with hospitality, actually, than food. I've got great food memories, but not the kind of food most people in New York would typically think about today, like Provel cheese melted on your pizza and toasted ravioli.
Casserole? Are you from casserole country?
We had some pretty good casseroles at home.
Hot dish?
Yeah, we had some pretty good ones. But I think the thing that I got more than anything from St. Louis was hospitality. It's the way people felt treated. Even if in the 1970s food was not a big deal for people in St. Louis, I think the way you treated people was always a big deal. And to be able to bring that to New York was unbelievably, to me, actually sort of a new thing in the 1980s.
What was it like when you moved to New York in the 1980s? What made you decide to come here?
I wanted to come to New York because I'd gone to college up in Hartford at Trinity College, and invariably on a weekend that you didn't want to spend in Hartford, New York was the place to go. So I would come down here all the time. I would come here jazz, I would go to see plays, eat in restaurants, sometimes go to the racetrack if I could find someone who wanted to go bet on the horses with me. And what I found in the city then was just this jolt of energy. You'd get off the FDR Drive, and the minute your car would turn, into Manhattan, you could actually feel the human energy. It was just like pulsing. And I've got to feel that energy is still here right now. But because I'm in it and part of it, I just don't notice it as much. But I felt that, and I felt that this was a place I just needed to spend more time. And I knew I would live here at some point, but I thought it was probably going to be a year experiment at the most.
When do you feel like you started to develop an identity as a New Yorker?
I think the first moment was my very first apartment in 1981, just before I came to New York for good. I decided to hang out with a friend who was, as many of us were doing, sharing his apartment with 3 other people. And the first night that I was there, sleeping on the floor because there wasn't an extra bed for me, was the night that John Lennon was shot.
John Lennon was shot 3 times at around 11 p.m. Eastern Time. He was rushed to New York's Roosevelt Hospital, but died a few minutes later. Police have a suspect in custody whom they describe only as a local screwball.
It just crushed me. First of all, I'm a John Lennon fan, and I didn't understand that violence. But the thing that moved me more than anything was that on the Sunday afternoon, right after that, I went to Central Park with I don't know how many tens of thousands of New Yorkers for a memorial. And hearing his voice blasting through Central Park, singing "In My Life" amongst New Yorkers just made me feel like I belonged here because I wanted to be part of that mass of humanity feeling the same thing at the same time. And I found an apartment. I found a little walk-up apartment that I shared with a roommate on 79th and 1st. And I knew I was only going to be in New York for a short time. The city was scary. There were, I think our apartment was burglarized at least twice. In fact, my next apartment was burglarized twice. There were muggings all the time. I got jumped in Times Square once. It was a scary place. And I knew it wasn't going to last. And then there was this day that I was on a rocking chair in my apartment, and all I could see out the window was a billboard that said Jet Midway to Chicago. And I just sat in my rocking chair for at least a half an hour, wondering if maybe what I should do is go back to the Midwest. And I woke up the next day and I said, no, I'm going to stay here. This is just too much fun. And so that 1 year has now turned into 37 years almost. And there's no way I would ever be able to take the Midwest out of who I am. But there's also no way I could ever imagine living anywhere other than New York City.
And so Meyer stayed and put down roots. He opened the Union Square Cafe in 1985, which quickly became one of the most popular restaurants in the city. Others soon followed: Gramercy Tavern, 11 Madison Park, The Modern, and later came the burger and fries chain Shake Shack. All of these restaurants are part of Meyer's company, the Union Square Hospitality Group, and every one of them is known for its outstanding service. But an even more distinct through line that connects these restaurants is that each place seems to reflect the unique character of the neighborhood where it's located. Here's Jenny Pachuki again in the studio with Meyer.
One of the things that your restaurants are known for is being a part of the fabric of the city in the sense that they create a place for community. New York is a different city because, we live in these little apartments and our lives tend to happen outside of the home. So the restaurant in New York becomes really important for creating community. How have you formed a philosophy of fostering a sense of community?
I think it's just how I'm wired. If you think about it, I feel like I know more people who were not born in Manhattan than who were born in Manhattan. And I know that Manhattan's only part of New York City, but almost all of us came from somewhere a little bit smaller than where we now live. And I think that part of what we crave as tribal creatures is the opportunity to belong to something that we can actually get our arms around. I think that restaurants provide that kind of opportunity to be placemakers. In fact, we've named many of our restaurants after their place. Sometimes the names are not very imaginative, but Union Square Cafe and Gramercy Tavern, The Modern, a restaurant that we created in 1998, 11 Madison Park, was to name that park as a place. And it's really a fantastic way to give New Yorkers and visitors to New York a way to understand that where they are matters. It's kind of like a winemaker who names their wine after the plot of land in which the grapes grew. It should taste like where it is. And I think that that's been something that's been incredibly rewarding, to be able to give ourselves that gift as we give that same gift to others.
Meyer was in New York on September 11th, 2001.
I'll never forget that day as long as I live. It was the first day of nursery school for our second daughter, Gretchen. And I was taking Gretchen to school. And we had to be there by 9 o'clock in the morning. And we started walking. And as we crossed over to Fifth Avenue, her school was on Fifth Avenue and 12th Street, there was the loudest airplane I had ever heard in my life overhead. And it was loud enough that I said, "Oh my gosh, can you hear how loud that airplane is?" But my mind certainly didn't do anything other than that. I just said, that's a loud airplane. I didn't see it. I didn't look up because I don't know if I heard the sound after it had already passed me, or I don't know. All I know is I heard it and commented on it, and that was that.
He dropped his daughter off and stopped to use an ATM at a nearby bank. It was here that he heard about a plane hitting the World Trade Center. But it wasn't until later, when he heard the news of a plane hitting the Pentagon, that the magnitude of what was happening set in. Meyer hurried back to retrieve his daughter Gretchen from nursery school.
And I was walking through Union Square, which was the easiest way to get there. And as I'm in the plaza where there's usually a green market, the entire building comes crumbling down before my eyes. And I ran to the school. It was actually my wife who had called the school to tell them about this because they didn't know. And the school had been sending kids home immediately. And I get to the school, and unbeknownst to me, Gretchen had been sent home with another family because they just wanted to evacuate the school. And so then I ran to the home where she was, which was on 7th Avenue. And as I get to 7th Avenue, the other building comes crumbling down right before all of our eyes. And this happened to be right outside of St. Vincent's Hospital. And so, the ambulances were just going crazy. And I grabbed my daughter and, was carrying her. And for whatever reason, my instinct was to run with her to Union Square Cafe on 16th Street. And as I got to Union Square Cafe with her, on the way there, everybody was, at this point, fully aware of what was going on, and I saw people I knew. In fact, every now and then, it'll pop into my mind a memory of someone who I ran into, and we hugged. But I forgot, because in that moment, we were all just in another world. But at Union Square Cafe, what I found was absolutely amazing, which was our entire kitchen staff, who we had said, you can go home right now. We're not opening the restaurant today, had said, no, we're staying here. And they had already decided, without asking me, without asking anybody, not just the kitchen staff, everybody, we're going to be closed for business, but we're going to be open to our community. And they were making sandwiches and they were in the dining room. They'd cleared out all the dining tables, and they were using the entire dining room to make sandwiches just to hand people. And I got Gretchen home right after that, and then I just started going to all of our restaurants to see how people were. As I got to 11 Madison Park, that team had marshaled their staff to, I don't even know how this all happened. They were already in the process of doing two different things. They were cooking food and having the food taken down to ground zero to serve whoever. They didn't know if anyone was alive. They didn't know if they were serving first responders. They just knew the one thing we could do would be to feed people. And the other thing they were doing, somebody had let them know that the Armory on Lexington and 25th Street was going to be a place for families to find out if their loved ones had survived or not. And so the other part of our team had asked the Armory if we could set up a kitchen in their basement and start cooking for those families. And I think I've probably never been prouder of the culture that we have at Union Square Hospitality Group, because culture doesn't need a director. It knows exactly where to go on its own. I then went back to Union Square Cafe, and I found that our bar was completely full of people, many of whom had marched all the way uptown. Rusty Staub, the baseball player, whose apartment was right by Ground Zero, for whatever reason, his internal compass, full of ashes, had marched him up to Union Square Cafe because he knew he could be comforted there. We had people coming in for lunch reservations with loved ones who worked at the World Trade Center hoping that their lunch date would show up. And I'll never forget, in one case at least, the lunch date did show up, and we saw a reunion between people who didn't know if that lunch would happen. That's what I remember from the day. I also remember that afternoon, which, as you recall, was the most gorgeous day in nature, on the bleakest day in human history that you can imagine, that the entire Gramercy Park neighborhood gathered in Gramercy Park. The locked gates were completely opened, and we just were all sitting on the grass, looking at the sky, being with each other, and wondering what the hell had just happened.
Were you reminded of your John Lennon moment?
I was, and I was reminded of the John Lennon moment almost every day thereafter in Union Square Park, which became the place where people came to be with people.
After September 11th, it sounds like on the day you all just reacted to do the right thing. That's a phrase that I hear a lot in my work, do the right thing, it was the right thing to do. But after you had a bit of time to think about things and plan and systemize a little bit, you continued to help serving the community. What were some of the things that you thought to do?
Well, in 2001, I was the chair of the restaurant committee for NYC and Company. And so it gave me the opportunity to marshal our entire industry in New York City. And we got together. The mayor came. Christine Nicholas was the head of NYC and Company at the time. She did a fantastic job. So did John Tisch. And we brought everybody together and we said, we need to, both for the survival of our industry, because nobody was going out to eat for so many reasons. New Yorkers did not want to be seen as having fun. And we all got together and we said, it's not going to help New York and it's not going to help New Yorkers if restaurants everywhere go out of business. In fact, restaurants are what we need. And we came up with a plan to invite New Yorkers into our restaurants as a place to heal. It was self-serving for the survival of the restaurant industry, but we believed that even more so, it was good for the healing of New Yorkers. And we came up with an emergency version of Restaurant Week. We came up with that idea. I'm not sure exactly how much we charged, but it was so little that you couldn't not go out to eat. And then we got people to do public service announcements, famous people saying the patriotic thing to do is to go out. And it wasn't just restaurants that were in terrible peril at that point. It was retail, it was cultural institutions, it was theater. And one by one, I think the things that make New York, New York, almost like green shoots in a field of ashes, started to come back to life. And that made people come here. We also had a major campaign to bring visitors back to New York, to say the patriotic thing is to come to New York. Don't stay away, because the bad guys will win if you do that. Now, as bad luck would have it, 9/11 happened right when the world was ready for a good recession anyway, or where our country was anyway, our economy. So it took a while to emerge from this, but I really believe that CPR that we gave the restaurant industry was an important part. And you got to remember that it took about 8 weeks for the city to stop smelling like that awful burning smell that really worked its way all the way up into the 30s.
Did you witness people who came together and came out? Did you witness healing taking place? Did you see people working through their grief and shock of what happened to their city?
I think it's hard to witness something when you're part of it yourself. I don't know when we did heal. I don't know if we ever will heal. I do think that time marches on, and you have new things to be happy about and sad about, and we've had lots of experiences since then. I don't think we fully realize how deeply our lives have been impacted.
But it's been over 15 years since the attacks, and Lower Manhattan has revitalized, and the building of the World Trade Center site is on its way to completion. And you've opened a few restaurants in Lower Manhattan that you didn't previously had before. What made you decide to come downtown?
I think we wanted to be part of that rebuilding process. We have a tea room at the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and we were actually asked to do that by the city. And it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like the right thing to do, to provide a place for people to be with their thoughts. And tea and, having your arms around a hot cup of something, tea, coffee, soup, and being with the person you were with after spending time, usually a significant amount of time, feeling deep, deep feelings, perhaps revisiting feelings you never thought you would want to revisit, felt like something that we could do for the visitors of the museum. And I'm glad we did it. We also opened restaurants across the West Side Highway at the north end of Battery Park City. And there's no question that downtown New York is stronger today than it was before 9/11 happened. And I think that's a testament to leadership. Not my leadership, but I think planners. I think planners who made it feel like a good place to live, made it feel like a good place to build offices, provided financial incentives to do all the above, made it feel like a good place for entrepreneurs to come. And I don't even think it's scratched the surface on how much potential downtown actually does have.
It's this interesting dichotomy when you were talking about your intentions and hopes for the cafe space. The rebuilding has been about strength and resilience and New York bouncing back. But it's funny because the only way to successfully do that is still to create a place for grief and acknowledge that people who visit, especially the site that we're sitting in right now, are still going to need that comfort and support. And just hearing you talk about, from the moments after September 11th when your restaurant staff came together and said, we need to do this, to think how, in a much very different way, you're still doing that to some extent. It's a beautiful trajectory.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story. I'm Will Thwaites. I host and produce the series alongside Jenny Pachuki. This episode was produced by Elizabeth Bistro and written by Jenny Pachuki, with executive producers Michael Frazier and Carl Cricco. Sound editing is done by Sam Behrens. Our City, Our Story is available on iTunes, Spotify, and our website, 911memorial.org. If you like the show, let us know. Leave a review on iTunes and tell us what you think. Also, to make sure you don't miss an episode of Our City, Our Story, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.